Welcome back to Sip and Talk. I'm Joe.
Hey everyone, I'm Sunny.
And it's that time again where we grab a cuppa and really get into what's shaking up the world, bringing you, hopefully, the juiciest insights from the latest international news.
Yeah.
Our mission, like always, is to help you cut through the noise, understand the big picture,
Right.
and maybe even find a few aha moments along the way.
Exactly. We're here to provide sort of an objective international perspective on these really complex issues.
Yeah.
And encourage you to think critically about them. So let's get into it.
Okay, so let's unpack this fascinating paradox right off the bat.
Okay.
The global markets, they're acting surprisingly calm, almost like eerily so, despite some pretty intense geopolitical stuff going on.
Especially in the Middle East, yeah.
Exactly. We're seeing European stocks like the Stoxx 600 and the S&P 500 holding steady, even inching up a bit. BofA, Global Research, even upped its Euro stock target to 530 points. What's going on here? Like everyone's just decided to chill out.
Well, what's fascinating here is that this apparent calm isn't just, wishful thinking. It's actually supported by a few key factors, some shifts, really.
Oh.
For one, the U.S. shale revolution, it's really boosted America's energy autonomy significantly.
Right. Less dependence.
Exactly. So even when oil prices might tick up, it doesn't spark that global panic the way it used to,
Yeah, I remember those days.
And secondly, the underlying economic fundamentals, especially with the U.S. and China maybe pausing some trade disputes, they remain surprisingly robust.
Oh.
And look, historically, markets often bounce back pretty quickly after the initial shocks from political events.
You mean like after 9/11 or...
Yeah, or even the start of the Ukraine conflict back in 2022. There's often that initial jolt, but then resilience kicks in.
But even with that sturdy base, there are still some huge question marks, right? I mean, it feels a bit fragile.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, what if things really escalate in the Strait of Hormuz and oil supply gets seriously disrupted?
That's a big one.
Or what about the Federal Reserve's next moves? Nobody ever seems to know for sure.
Always a wild card.
Or potential EU economic sanctions, or how those U.S.-China trade tensions actually play out long term. These still feel like little tripwires,
They absolutely are. The market might be calm now, but it could pivot fast if one of those tripwires gets hit.
Okay, switching gears a bit to Europe. This is where it gets really interesting on the economic front, I think. France is really pushing for something called Eurobonds, basically, joint European Union bonds.
Right. Shared debt.
Yeah, and their big goal seems to be creating more high-quality euro-denominated assets. They want to boost the euro standing globally.
Make it a stronger reserve currency.
Exactly, and rely less on the U.S. dollar, especially with all the, let's say, policy uncertainty coming out of the U.S. lately. It sounds like a big step towards more unity.
Indeed. And supporters, you've got the head of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, ECB President Christine Lagarde. They see this as a way to address what they call a shortage of safe assets in the Eurozone.
A shortage? Interesting.
Yeah. Lagarde specifically mentioned, the euro is already the world's second largest reserve currency, holds about 20% globally. And joint bonds could significantly increase that. But, and this is a big, but not everyone is on board.
Oh, I can imagine. Germany and the Netherlands, right?
Yeah.
They're known for being pretty strict fiscally.
Exactly. They are totally against the idea of jointly taking on other countries' debts. Moral hazard is the big fear.
They're worried they'll end up footing the bill if, say, another country faces a sovereign debt crisis down the line.
Like Greece years ago, that memory looms large.
Yeah. So the upcoming EU Leaders Summit, end of June 26-27, that's going to be a real showdown for this idea.
Absolutely. Expect fireworks.
Yes.
And sticking with Europe but shifting to defense, we're seeing some friction within NATO, too.
Ooh.
Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez has openly rejected the U.S. proposal to raise NATO military spending to 5% of GDP.
5%? Wow, that's a big jump.
It is. And Spain feels this would hit social welfare, strain their budget. So
Yeah.
they're asking for an exemption or at least more flexibility.
So that could definitely impact the NATO summit in The Hague, also end of June.
Could complicate things, yeah.
Yeah.
Getting everyone on the same page for spending is always tough.
Okay, now let's zip over to the Asia-Pacific region. Tensions are definitely heating up there.
Seems that way.
We're seeing Japan's Coast Guard teaming up with the U.S. and the Philippines for joint drills. Looks like they're trying to boost maritime enforcement intelligence sharing.
Right. It sounds like a pretty direct response to rising concerns in the West Pacific, building alliances.
Yeah.
And Japan is also adjusting its fiscal tools, interestingly. Even cutting back on ultra-long government bond issuance seems aimed at stabilizing its financial markets amidst these regional challenges.
So a multi-pronged approach.
Yeah.
Defense and finance.
Exactly. Taking it seriously.
And then there's Taiwan.
Yeah.
Always a sensitive spot.
Oh.
Just recently, after a British Royal Navy ship patrolled the Taiwan Strait, Taiwan's defense ministry detected over 70 Chinese military aircraft flying near the median line.
70 in 24 hours.
Yeah, with some crossing it. That definitely cranks up the alert level in an already, very tense area.
No kidding. That's a significant show of force, likely a direct response to the UK ship's presence, asserting dominance.
Feels like a constant state of high alert over there. Okay, let's talk about the Middle East, specifically the U.S., Iran, and Israel dynamics.
Right, a very complex web.
So President Trump has apparently given a 2-week deadline, or had given one, to decide on military action against Iran, trying to create space for diplomacy, maybe.
That seems to be the idea. Leverage through threat, perhaps. The core goal, stated anyway, is stopping Iran from getting nuclear weapons.
And we've seen U.S. military buildups in the Persian Gulf, right? Aircraft carrier strike groups, extra fighter jets. CNN reported on that back in June. It feels like a very, very tense standoff.
It absolutely is. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign minister is in Geneva talking with European leaders trying to ease the situation.
But Iran says no real talks as long as Israel keeps up attacks in places like Gaza or Lebanon.
That's their stated position, yeah. But interestingly, Reuters reported also in June that Iran has actually reduced its enriched uranium stockpile.
Oh, really?
Yeah, showing some willingness to compromise, perhaps under pressure, though they still refuse to give up their nuclear program entirely.
And Trump prefers direct talks with Iran, not through Europe.
Seems that way, yeah. More transactional, maybe.
And what about military intervention? Analysts put the chance of direct U.S. action at, what, about 35%?
Around there, yeah. Not insignificant, but not guaranteed either.
And Israel. The Times of Israel reported their Air Force recently simulated strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities.
Right, showing they're absolutely determined to hit Iran's nuclear and missile programs. Potentially with or without direct U.S. involvement, they see it as existential.
But what about Iran blocking the Strait of Hormuz? That's always the nightmare scenario, isn't it? Global oil supply.
The risk of a full blockade is actually considered low.
Oh, why is that?
Because it would severely impact global energy supplies, yes, but also Iran's own economy. Hugely damaging for them, too.
Oh, okay.
Bloomberg suggested back in June that Iran is more likely to use proxies, Hezbollah, the Houthis, for lower intensity conflicts rather than provoke a full-scale war.
Makes sense. And the Iranian regime itself, is it stable?
Well, a complete overthrow seems unlikely in the short term. It's perhaps more probable we might see leadership changes within the Revolutionary Guard itself.
Internal shifts, not collapse.
Right. And the U.S. isn't necessarily hoping for a total collapse either. The Guardian noted that could lead to even more instability or extremism in the region. Sometimes the devil you know.
Yeah, true. Now, there's also this idea floating around, you hear it sometimes, about Iran's mission is Israel's destruction, often linked to religious prophecies. Is there actually any solid historical or religious basis for that?
Right, that's a really important question. If we dig into it, there isn't clear, direct religious text that explicitly states Iran's mission is the destruction of Israel.
Where does it come from?
Well, the Christian Post mentioned how some Christians interpret biblical prophecies like Ezekiel 38:39 about Magog, sometimes identified with ancient Persia or Iran attacking Israel in the end times. But these are, largely speculative interpretations, not literal commands.
Okay, and in Islam?
Similarly, in Islam, especially Shia eschatology, there's talk of a messianic figure, the Mahdi, who brings justice. Some radical elements might interpret Israel as an unjust force. But Al-Monitor clarified this is more political rhetoric used by the current Iranian leadership. It helps rally domestic support, justifies policies, it's framed religiously, but the roots are more political and geopolitical than purely scriptural mandate.
Got it. So more modern politics than ancient texts. And this brings us, interestingly, to Russia. They have ties here, too.
They do.
Russia's economy minister, Maxim Reshetnikov, just warned that the country is on the brink of recession.
Yeah, AP News reported that. Despite high military spending and surprisingly low unemployment, like 2.4%.
Which sounds good, but...
But the long-term pressure is mounting. Inflation is high, 9.8%. There's a lack of foreign investment. Forecasts even suggest stagflation, that's stagnant growth, plus inflation later this year.
And their budget deficit is almost at its annual target already. Ouch!
It paints a picture of real economic strain, yeah. Western sanctions are tightening, especially on energy exports and their shadow fleet of tankers.
Right, trying to dodge sanctions.
Exactly. It's leading to wider discounts on Russian Urals oil, cutting into revenue. And the EU just approved new tariffs on Russian fertilizer imports, too. Another hit.
The Financial Times even compared it to the German Empire in 1917. That's stark.
Yeah, suggesting that excessive military spending could lead to a serious long-term decline. It's a historical parallel they drew.
So what does this all mean for Iran and Israel, then? If Russia's economy keeps struggling, does that limit its ability to support allies like Iran, especially with drone supplies?
That's the crucial link. Russia Matters reported that Russia itself is concerned about Iran's regime stability affecting those drone deliveries, which Russia needs.
So it's a two-way street of vulnerability.
Exactly. A weaker Russia might mean less reliable or fewer advanced drones for Iran, potentially changing the military balance in the conflicts Iran is involved in. It's all interconnected.
Definitely a complex web. Okay, shifting focus slightly. Let's quickly touch on a specific incident in the UK.
Okay.
On June 20th, a group called Palestine Action broke into the RAF Breeze Norton Air Base. Spray-painted red paint on 2 Voyager refueling planes.
Right, I saw that.
They claim it was a protest against UK support for Israel's military actions. This definitely raised some eyebrows about security at military bases.
For sure. I mean, regardless of the target, and Sky News reported, these specific planes aren't directly refueling Israeli jets, but are used against ISIS and Houthi rebels. Still, the fact that they could breach security at such a significant base, that's a serious concern. It prompted a nationwide security review of military facilities, highlights of vulnerability.
Yeah, you'd think security would be tighter. And then there's President Trump's ongoing talk about tariffs. His second term started in January 2025.
And the tariff talk continues.
He's been threatening new ones on China, Russia, the EU, prioritizing America first. Senator Lindsey Graham is even pushing a bill for a 500% tariff on countries buying Russian energy.
Whoa.
While there's no specific July forecast yet, big summits like the G7 or NATO seem like prime time for these kinds of announcements, right?
Absolutely. That's often where these things get unveiled. Reuters reported back in May that Trump mentioned considering new tariffs on Russia, maybe to push for a ceasefire in Ukraine.
But would they even work? U.S.-Russia trade is already way down.
That's the question. The impact might be limited because Russia has largely pivoted to China and other non-Western countries, and Yahoo News warned these tariffs could just spike prices for American consumers, reignite inflation.
So, potential blowback at home.
Yeah. Plus, his stance on Russia sanctions has been a bit softer lately. The New York Times noted he might prefer business deals over continued pressure. So it's a bit unpredictable.
Okay, finally, let's talk about something incredibly exciting and maybe a bit scary. Artificial intelligence.
AI, it's everywhere.
The market is just exploding, projected to grow more than 8 times by 2033. Massive growth in chips, foundational models, data centers, NVIDIA, Google, Meta.
Transformative stuff.
And then you have companies building platforms on top of that and AI agents like Tesla's robotaxis for consumers.
It's moving incredibly fast. And what's interesting is seeing the different types of AI making waves.
Go on.
You've got the large language models, the LLMs like ChatGPT, great for cost-cutting, customer service, that kind of thing.
But they can sometimes hallucinate, right? Make stuff up.
Exactly. That's the downside. Then you have what are being called large quantum models, LQMs, like Sandbox AQ, more B2B focused.
Quantum, how does that work?
Well, they're designed to solve really complex problems, stuff in biology, chemistry, problems classical computers struggle with. They're creating entirely new revenue streams, pushing scientific boundaries. It's not just optimizing, it's innovating.
Wow. Okay. And Tesla. They're planning to launch robotaxis in Austin, but there's pushback.
Yeah, Texas lawmakers are trying to delay it. Safety concerns. Bloomberg highlighted how Musk's self-driving promises still face big technical and regulatory hurdles. It's not easy.
No kidding. Meanwhile, the U.S. might be expanding chip sales restrictions to China.
While China tightens its grip on critical mineral exports needed for those chips.
It's a full-on tech war, isn't it? Reuters called it that. A global chess match with silicon chips.
It really is. So, I mean, what does this all mean for you listening? We've seen how these geopolitical tensions, economic policies, tech advancements, they're all intertwined.
Yeah.
Creates challenges, sure, but also opportunities. And despite that surface calm in the markets we started with, the undercurrents of change are really strong.
It really shows how interconnected everything is, doesn't it? Eurobonds in Brussels, chip wars in Beijing, market reactions in New York. It all eventually impacts our everyday lives. Price of gas, maybe your job, the tech in your pocket. It's not abstract stuff.
Not at all. It's the world we live in.
So as we wrap up this Sip and Talk session, maybe consider this. In a world that seems to be constantly teetering between calm and chaos, what new safe assets are emerging?
Good question.
And I don't just mean financial ones. Maybe geopolitical alignments or even intellectual assets like understanding AI. What new forms of security are out there that we haven't fully recognized yet?
Something to definitely mull over.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for tuning in to Sip and Talk. We hope you enjoyed this journey through the latest global headlines.
Please remember to subscribe to our podcast, Sip and Talk, wherever you listen. It really helps.
And hey, do yourselves a favor and check out our old pal Micky's YouTube channel. Seriously, it's got awesome memes, great music, some fantastic wine tasting tips.
And super fun travel vlogs.
Yeah. You won't regret it. Give it a look.
Definitely check it out.
Okay, see you next time.
See you next time.